Welcome to the Tao of Pizza, where we feature top logistics leaders, entrepreneurs, and supply chain innovators and share their inspiring stories with a holistic twist.
Mark Hiddleson here, host of the Tao of Pizza podcast, where I talk with top industry innovators in the warehousing, logistics, and supply chain business with a holistic twist. Before I introduce today's guest, this episode is brought to you by Specialized Storage Solutions. Listen, I've been in the logistics and storage industry for several decades. I know I don't look that old, but it's true. We provide industry-leading warehouse storage solutions nationwide. So basically, if you have a warehouse that needs rack, shelving, carts, conveyors, or mezzanines, we help with the design, installation, engineering, inspections, and repairs to help clients optimize their logistics operations. Some people don't even realize we do permit acquisition services. So we take a holistic look at your entire business supply chain to help you develop the resources for continually improving your operation. So to learn more, visit specialracks.com or give us a call at 707-732-3892. And I even give my email to podcast listeners. My personal email is markhiddleson@aol.com. So give us a call if you want to take your warehouse storage and retrieval systems to the next level. So today we have Christine Garvin, who's an expert functional nutritionist based in Asheville, North Carolina. She weaves together her personal health journey, including a fibroid surgery that nearly killed her, with her training in functional health, nutrition, and hormones to help women heal their gut and achieve hormonal balance. She's been featured in Health, Shape, Parade Magazine, and MSN. She is the host of the podcast Hormonally Speaking and works with clients all over the world via Zoom and offers group programs for gut healing and hormone health. Find out more at ChristineGarvin.com. And Christine, thank you very much for joining us on the Tao of Pizza.
Absolutely, Mark. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and I have to mention that we are you're kind of a special guest because we're industrial podcast, but it's the holistic twist part. And we went to school together. And I can't believe that it was 15, 16 years ago. Seems like yesterday.
It's crazy. It's totally crazy to me that so much of my life has been lived since then. It for so long didn't seem that long ago. And now you're like, okay, time marches on.
Yeah. Yeah. And every time I've connected with, I saw a post that you did on LinkedIn. And then I was like, oh, wow. And then I thought you were a guest on a podcast. And then I'm like, wow, Christine's hosting. You're hosting a podcast. So I thought it was cool. I looked at your website and I'm like, man, we studied holistic health education. And when I saw your stuff, I was like, this is the kind of thing we talked about, holistic. And it's sometimes it's hard to explain to people what you mean by holistic. And it means so many different things. Great to see you. Big shout out to JFK, which was an awesome experience. And started, I wanted to ask you how did you choose JFK? Because really unique school, really unique program. So how did you get to that point to choose JFK?
Oof. Good question. I would say that there was certainly a process that led me there, and that really kicked off with when I graduated from undergrad in 2000, and I was 21, I guess, then. And pretty much right after I graduated, I always tell people that my stomach fell out. I lost, probably 20 pounds in 2 weeks. I literally just out of nowhere had this serious, issue with my stomach that ended up being diagnosed as IBS. And that was kind of the beginning of my journey towards holistic health, right? Because pretty early on, I just didn't want to accept that diagnosis of IBS, and there wasn't really much that they can do with that anyway,
Yeah.
And I moved to California not long after that, and I just slowly started to learn more about food and how the food that we eat impacts our digestion, and how important whole foods are and getting real nutrition. And I had had a pretty much standard American diet, through college. And so I slowly started healing my gut through that process, really kind of on my own, but it opened up deeper and deeper things, right? And at one point, I actually went to Africa. I had a friend that was doing the Peace Corps in Zambia. And so I went and visited her. It's probably about 2 years after I graduated from college. And I came back and I'd had malaria while I was there. I had some unknown, yeah, I know. And I was on anti-malarials, but 60% coverage rate. So I fell in that 40%. And I had some other, like when they found out I had malaria, I also found out that I had some other infection that they couldn't even really say what it was. And I came back and I was pretty broken down and exhausted and tired and just having reactions to all the foods I was eating, and that took me on a deeper journey to, okay, wow, I need to understand what's going on in my digestive system and, and learning about things like candida and yeast and all of these, I didn't learn about all the pathogens then, but it kind of started me on that. So finally, after that traveling and starting to slowly heal myself, I was like, I want to know more, right? And that I understand that health is not just about the food that I'm eating and my digestion. There's all of these different aspects to it. And so I started looking around because I was, back in San Francisco at that point. And I remember looking at CIIS. And I
Which
remember
is
looking at
the College of
California
Integral Studies.
Yeah.
Yeah. California Institute
Studies,
of Integral
yes.
Studies. Yeah. Yeah.
There it is. You got it. I was gonna attempt, and then I was like, yeah, I don't remember it enough. But yes, that's it.
Yeah.
And then New College, I think was the other one. I don't know if you remember New College.
Yeah, it doesn't.
There was one up in north of San Francisco, and then I feel like they had a second placement. But I was also kind of looking into environmental studies because I was like, I just learned when I was traveling about sustainable farms and things like that. But really, I ended up landing on JFK because I don't think that even the program at CIIS that was similar to our program, it just didn't pull me in the same way that the program at JFK did. And I remember trying out one class. I can't remember if you were in that class with me or not, but it was Vicky, who I think you said you had on your podcast recently. Right?
And I talked to her yesterday. She is so awesome. I thought you were in that class. It was Blossom in the Spring, probably the first one, or there was another one. Yeah.
Yeah. I just remember, I don't even remember the specifics other than learning about, about my energy systems and chi and like moving it and qigong. And so that was like, okay, these are my people.
Yeah, it's home.
Essentially.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought up Vicky because she introduced me to another author that I've hosted last week. So
nice.
Solo Towler.
So she's doing well?
She's doing really well. And I took one of her classes. I had a friend, she was on the podcast, she invited me, and I had a friend coming over and we were going to do like a 2 or 3 hour bicycle ride. And she goes, oh, this would be a great warm-up for a bicycle ride. So I had my friend who he's similar to me. I mean, hasn't taken it, but he's into really meditation and he's more of a health nut than I am. And when he did, he's like, dude, this is the most awesome. I mean, we got all these awesome we had a hummingbird fly in between us while we were practicing.
That's amazing.
Wild nature. Yeah, and Vicky is such a gifted master teacher. I mean, she's really, she's really good.
I think the story that I will always remember about her was she was talking about how, living in San Francisco, I know it's even crazier now, but there's just a lot coming at you, right? And she's a smaller woman, and she said that she would, be leaving the BART, which is the subway system there, and she would get touched or manhandled by different people, and it always just would grate on her so much. And then she started, essentially building up her chi, and we're doing qigong. And one day she was walking out of the subway station, and this guy went to like grab her. And basically his hand kind of bounced off without
Yeah.
touching her because she had honed in her energy so well that it was just like boom. And she said the guy's face was just like, what just happened?
And it was something
You know?
because he felt something. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So I'll never forget that story about her because that really opened me up to this understanding of a level of health that we don't generally talk about, right? I mean, we, for the most part in Western culture, focus mostly on the physical. We're just, I'd say, really in the past 10 years, has it become really mainstream to focus on more of the emotional health aspect and understanding how that impacts our physical health. But we're still missing out on that energetic health level, right? And it's just as important as the other two.
It really is in your energy. A friend of mine has he's a performance coach. So energy is his main thing. It's
Mm.
John Allen Mollenhauer, but his whole because energy, it starts with sleep. So like his class is for
Hmm.
max performers, and it's like the first thing is on sleep. It's like we came here
Yeah.
because we're the max performer, top level, and it's like let's take a nap, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
it's true. I mean,
100%.
yeah, your energy and I mean, the qigong is something I've just incorporated into almost every day. I mean, it's not like I don't really do anything every day, but I do try to just do
Hmm.
those movements because in energy, because some things can suck your energy, and the qigong
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
helps you come back to center, not get
Yep.
distracted or get dragged into stuff, or even when you do get dragged
Yes.
into stuff, there's more
You
awareness
can
of,
handle it better. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
And,
that's
I like to let people know from a hormonal standpoint, whether you're a man or a woman, but, or however you identify. But I will say for a cycling woman's body in particular, when our stress hormone cortisol is like off the charts because of all the things that are happening in our lives, that can really impact our sex hormones in a negative way, right? And so, always the goal with my clients is we got to get your cortisol balanced, right? We often it's either too high or it's been high so long that it ends up being low because your brain will say, hey, this isn't working. So we're going to down regulate it, right? And then people struggle to get out of bed. And things like qigong and other energy work that you can do really just regulates your nervous system. Like on a physical level, there's a regulation of your nervous system happening. And that's going to bring down that high cortisol. It's going to help bring up if it's low and really get it to where you need it to go, And I think that ability also to disengage with things that we don't need to be fully engaged in,
yeah,
right? That
yeah,
that just want to take us on this like roller coaster ride of life. And we have a million things coming at us every day that want to do that. And so to learn how to come back into yourself, and you can kind of just watch that roller coaster instead of being on it. Right.
exactly. Exactly. And then, or feel it when it grabs you, and you're like, okay, something grabbed me. It's like
Yep.
this is
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
involuntary.
And I'm not going to let it keep holding on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that is really
Hmm.
cool.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
so, how did you go from? So that was the JFK and the JFK experience. When I think about those, it was the people at JFK too. I don't know if we went there to interview. I mean, it
Hmm.
was the teachers, tons of gifted teachers, and
Hmm.
we had to do like 10 of those
Hmm.
weekend things that we did with Vicky. There were
Oh,
other
yeah.
ones where it was a
Mhm.
weekend,
Mhm.
like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, all day. And I always knew they were really cool
Mhm.
and they were really awesome. But now it's like,
Mhm.
wow. And we were practicing with like the group we had or the people. It's not just the leaders, it's
Yep.
the participants that add so much
Right. Yeah.
to groups.
Yep,
So
absolutely. I really loved those weekend ones. In the beginning you're like, "Oh, I have to do all these extra
yeah,
classes," but I got some of the most potent stuff out of those weekend classes together, and you really do. I mean, I think a lot of people talked about this while they were at JFK and also after they left JFK. It was a little bit of a cocoon, right? It was
yeah,
like what some people may call a safe space. I know
Right.
some people don't like that term, but it truly safe space to where you're being held and supported by other people, and the regular world is not really like that so
I
much.
like the word
So
I
I
don't like is container. We're going to create a container.
container. Yep. Some of the lingo is still and there's certain words that have just they drive me crazy at this point. But yeah, so it's going outside of the language of it all. It was such a beautiful healing possibility, I think, for so many people that may not have been able to experience that kind of safety before. And going back to our nervous system again, we can't heal our bodies without healing our nervous system. Like, it just always is going to come back to that. And so I wish that everyone could experience that, that kind of connection and support and stability, because then we could take that out into the world more, right? Instead of, okay, this is our little, we're like supported over here, and then we got to go out into the world and take a beating, and
Right.
as we know, in some ways that's gotten a whole lot worse in the last 15 years, just with, the bad side of social media, I guess you would say.
Yeah, and I've avoided social media like the plague. I'm on LinkedIn. I mean, that's how we connected. So it's not all
Mm-hmm.
bad because
Mm-hmm.
great
Right. Of
things,
course.
good
Yep.
connections,
Mm-hmm.
but it is,
Mm-hmm.
toxic, especially for young people. And I think what I've read is
Yeah.
it's like women in their 20s to 30s are overly more for reasons, for
Mm-hmm.
whatever they are.
Mm-hmm.
Most susceptible. Yeah, I have a daughter who's
Yeah.
22, and like she's in that age group, and they're super
In it.
social, and
Yeah.
they're in it, and so it's
Yep. It's really tough. I am so grateful that it did not exist in my youth, and
yeah,
in my 20s. I mean, I guess it started a little bit in my 20s, like late 20s, but it's nothing like how it is now. And you have to be really cognizant of the noise. And, I do think there's certainly a lot of benefits to social media, and I utilize it for my business and connecting with people 100%. But I have to be very, I try and curate my stuff as much as possible and really follow and listen to people that I admire that have good messages. Like, that's what I love is you can find, I think a lot of people, for a long time believed, okay, I'm the only one that's this weird way, right? And then with social media, you're like, oh, there's a whole bunch of other people that are weird out there in the same way that I am. And so I can connect with them, and sort of going back to that sort of safety place, it's given people that. But then you can get way too caught up on the other side of the sort of influencer world, and obviously all of the ways that we look different with filters and things like that, and especially women are susceptible to believing that these women that they're seeing on social media actually look that way when they don't, because it's a filter on top of plastic surgery, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah. You wouldn't
So,
even recognize
mhm.
those people if you saw them on the street, and
Exactly.
it's actually my daughter has done pictures of. Oh, it's funny you mentioned that. A lot of the people I've hosted, and you probably, I mean, I don't know if you do too, but they have professional headshots. And I was
Hmm.
like, when I
Hmm.
look at mine, and then we look at them, and then on the podcast, and sometimes they don't, and so we try to find a better picture. And then
Hmm.
I was telling my daughter's taking the pictures of me. I go, we don't have professional headshots, but I'm like, that's me. Like, that's what I look like. And it's not
Right.
as good. They're not as good, but I'm like, that's
Right.
me. And
But you're
that's,
keeping it real.
yeah. And
I
what's
like
part of
it.
the podcast for me is, and social media, I'm lumping podcasts in there kind of because a
Hmm.
lot of people say, well, I don't have time for podcasts,
Hmm.
or, that's not, but I was kind of anti-podcast, which is a funny thing. And I'm like, I'm not listening.
Me
I don't
too.
have time.
I
But then I was interested in something, and there was an expert who was on. Well, I was watching Chase. There's so many interviews. I saw Chase Jarvis, who has a company here in San Francisco. It's called Creative Live. They do classes,
mm,
online classes. I saw him
hmm.
interview Mark Cuban. I really like Mark Cuban. And then
Hmm.
And then I had a coach that I was working with, and he was sending me these podcasts, and it's like, well, if a coach gives you something, like you're paying them,
You gotta listen.
you need to do it. And I was amazed that it's stuff. If you're interested in something specific, you can get to know people. It is real. It's real people having real conversation. I found I could learn things real quick. Or if I was just going to go Google it or do my own homework. So,
Right.
and you can get to kind of know people. And so it was one of the reasons I wanted to do was one to share knowledge, connect, with people and spread the word.
Absolutely.
Like you said, if we can take this container and bring it out that other people can see what's possible. That's how one of the ways I can bring the work we talked about, like the JFK work, or that's how it shows up. So
Out into the world. Absolutely.
yeah.
I was the same way about podcasts, though. I was so not into wanting to listen to them. And then I had a coach who recommended that I start a podcast, right? And I said, nope. And then at some point I decided, I mean, it's so funny how you can kind of sneak your way in from the side. But I was like, oh, I'm just going to do a YouTube video where I talk with a colleague, which is, I mean, essentially it's a podcast,
But it's
right?
not a podcast.
It's just, right. I just put it up on YouTube, but then I had the audio version of it too, so finally I said, well, I might as well go ahead and just start the podcast because I'm already doing that essentially from that video perspective. So that's how my podcast got started, but I love it. I mean, I don't like the editing and the admin around it. Luckily I have somebody helping me with some of that now, but I love the conversations. I always learn something new. It keeps me, up to date on a lot of the experts that are out there in my field. So yeah, I'm a big fan of doing it and listening to them now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was surprised. That was the big benefit for me, the personal growth for me personally from doing the interviews and then the people that I've had and then being hosted. It's one of the best for me personally. I was just been a great, like you said, just learning the conversations and the people.
Yep.
Yeah. But it's not a podcast. I'm just having interviews and posting it online.
Not a podcast. I like it. You're like, I'm sticking with it.
Yeah. So how did you what were kind of the days after JFK? I mean, I look at your website, you just updated it, right? So
I did.
What was kind of your website looks great. Your share a little bit about I love your you have like a 3 key points for you have like a worksheet or a blueprint, what I'd call. What is it? Share a little bit about that because that looks like a really valuable tool that somebody can download for free to get signed up for your stuff.
Yep.
And
So really, when it comes to hormone issues, and I would say this is just as true for because I do work with men a little bit too. I have more female clients, but I do work with men on gut and hormone health too. But for hormone health and really a lot of our health in general comes down to our gut health, our liver health, and our adrenals. And within that, tied in with the adrenals is your thyroid, right? Because your adrenals and thyroid are really your energy systems. And your adrenals are what release that stress hormone cortisol that we were talking about just a few minutes ago, right? And has such a huge impact because it's all part of the endocrine system. So most people that come to me, whether they come to me for gut issues or hormone issues, have gut issues. I would say a good majority of Americans have gut issues.
Yeah.
Whether they want to admit that to themselves or not, my favorite, I'm going to be a little maybe crass here, but my favorite thing is I always ask people how their digestion is, when we're first talking and they'll say almost all the time, they'll say, oh, it's pretty good, and I'll say, okay, so how many bowel movements, a day? And, sometimes that will be fine, 1, 2 a day. But then I say, well, how much gas and bloating do you have? And they're like, oh, well, I mean, just like a regular amount. And I'm like, what's a regular amount, you know? And the reality is we really don't need to have a ton of gas every day. You know, we really should have minimal gas. And I think most people don't realize that because it's just, it's common to have a decent amount of gas. And I always say it's common, but not normal. And so it will make people think, oh, okay, maybe my digestion can use a little support when I didn't necessarily realize that it did, and the reality about our bowels and our digestion as a whole is we want to take things in, we want to take food in, we want to take whatever we're drinking, and have the body break it down, absorb the nutrients from it, and then essentially move it out, right? We don't want it hanging out for a long time in our bodies because it's either, just stuff we no longer need, or it has toxins in it that our liver has broken down and basically packaged up and moved it into our colon and as part of our stool. Or, it's just like excess things that don't need to be in our body, And so that is where so many issues come into play because people's bodies aren't breaking down the food well enough. They're not digesting, absorbing the nutrients. They're not getting the toxins out of their body, as fast as we would like. And then you have a bunch of, for some people, opportunistic bacteria is a pretty common thing. Pathogens, we don't like to think, we're like, oh, our dogs, we got to deworm. But we don't have any of that stuff going on, and I'm like, well, if our animals that we live with have them, they don't just say, oh, we're not, going over to the humans. And so, understanding sort of how your gut microbiome is working or not working is a huge underlying part of all aspects of health, because you just have to think, if your gut isn't working, if you're not absorbing those nutrients well, then your organs can't do all the work that they need to be doing. Your brain can't do all the work that it needs to be doing. Really, every part of our body needs vitamins and minerals and nutrients in order to work properly, down to our cells, our mitochondria, It's like we need enough B vitamins. We need antioxidants, all of those things for our cells to actually work properly.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are, I can go off on a tangent forever about the gut, but really those are the three keys: is the gut, the liver, because you got to detoxify all that stuff coming in, and you have to detoxify hormones too, and then your adrenals, and you sort of support and boost all of those, and then hormone regulation starts to happen on its own.
And I noticed another part of your, I looked at your classes. I can't think of what it's called. I think it's called the soul, something about soul lessons. So what you talked about with the gut and everything seems like, okay, super mechanical, and you need to look at all these. It's still holistic because you're looking all these different systems, and the cortisol, like stress, is what causes cortisol, right? And so for me, like I could talk about bowel movements all day too, but it's not. I do notice it's one of the things you notice a difference if I don't move. Like if I'm not, like, I love to exercise, we walk to work, and if I go through a period of like 4 or 5 days where I don't, it starts to affect my digestive system, and it's like I can tell, and it's like, oh, I need to move. It's in the morning, and like this is not, like you
Huge
said,
part
it's
of it.
normal or common, but not normal side effects of just not. And then you move, and it's like, whoa, this is way different. And then things look different. You know what I mean? When you're moving, and it feels different.
Absolutely. It impacts your mood on a huge, I mean, having gone through, and we can talk a little bit more about this later, but, I went through this surgery where I nearly lost my life, and I lost half of my colon in the process, right? And so digestion is very near and dear to my heart. And I have been through so many different layers of gut issues since that time. And so I can really speak to how much it impacts my mood when my gut's not working well.
Yeah.
And And that's, I mean, it's funny because even energy systems can play into your gut health too, right?
Yeah.
Trauma impacts our gut health. Holding on to old emotions, can impact our gut health. So it's never just the sort of physical aspect, which is the food and the supplements and the movement and all of that. It's that emotional and energetic part too.
Yeah. So tell us more. What
Mhm.
happened when did the fibroid surgery, what happened? Like, do share more, because I definitely want
Yeah.
to ask you about that.
So, I kind of went into what led me to JFK in the first place. And I call that my first major health crisis, right? Because it was also stomach related and, led me on a new path in life. And my second health crisis was this fibroid that it grew when I was 39. Well, I don't know how long it was growing, but it was found when I was 39. And the thing that was interesting to me was I actually dealt with lots of menstrual issues growing up and, in my 20s. And the way that I had sort of moved my life and the way that I was eating and taking care of myself, my menstrual cycle was great for all of my 30s, right? And so it was interesting because suddenly the cycle was changing. And then I actually found the fibroid myself. And by the time, we got in and did a ultrasound, it was about 6 centimeters, which is about the size of a lemon. And what it had, yeah. And it's interesting, right? Because when you learn the size of the uterus, it's pretty small, right? And everything is really close in there, right? The uterus is up against the colon and up against the bladder. It's kind of all close together. And so when you have something the size of a lemon suddenly there, it's pushing, right? And it's creating. And this is what, if any women are listening to this episode, up to 80% of women will have a fibroid by the time they're 50. Sometimes they'll be in a place where it doesn't impact you or they'll stay small, what have you, but fibroids like to grow. And so the biggest and best thing that you can do is find out that you have a fibroid early before it grows to the size of mine, because at that point, there's not a lot that you can necessarily, I mean, I take that back. I would do things differently now, but it's harder at that size to naturally shrink it. And so surgery often feels like the best option, right? Because for me, it created anemia because I was bleeding excessively due to it. And then it was actually pushing out on my tailbone.
Oh,
So it was this joke. I was teaching dance at that point, and it was
uh-huh.
this joke that I was like growing a tailbone before we knew what it was. Because I would sit down and I would be like, "Ow," And
What
so it
is
was this
that?
big joke that I had a tailbone. And then it turns out, I mean, this fibroid actually pushed out the bone. So they take over. They can grow up to like the size of you know a baby. So there's some women walking around with fibroids the size of a baby inside of them. It's crazy. So, anyways, found out I had the fibroid and decided just because of the size and what was going on with me that I was going to go ahead and do the surgical route. Now, there's more choices now, but when you go to a doctor, they're going to basically say, we'll either do a hysterectomy, which is like taking the whole shebang out except for your ovaries. And I said, I don't want to do that because it's crazy to me to go and take an organ out just because it has a growth on it that is non-cancerous.
Right.
Um, and so the second option is called the myomectomy, which is where they go in and just cut out the fibroid essentially and leave your uterus intact. And so, that's what I decided to do. And it's a little bit more prone to complications. I didn't really understand why at the time. I understand why now. But long story short, I got the surgery done. They said everything went perfectly well. They sent me home the next day. And looking back that morning leaving the hospital, part of me knew something was wrong, but that was my first surgery ever. And I just, kind of chalked it up to, I mean, I just had surgery. I'm in pain, but I really kind of knew something was off. And this is what I always tell people, no matter who it is, man, woman, if you, particularly 3 to 4 days after surgery, if you're not feeling better. Like you should be on the upswing by 4 days after surgery. So
Yeah.
if you aren't, go to the ER and let them know you just had surgery and that you're worried about sepsis. Because I unfortunately waited 2 weeks
Oh, wow.
and I had no idea about sepsis. I had no idea that I had gone, who knows when I went into sepsis. But by the time I went to the ER, they said that if I'd waited one more day, I'd be dead.
Yeah.
So what
Just-
ended up happening, it's crazy. So basically what they finally determined, I was in the ER all day, and finally they said, we have to roll you into emergency surgery because there's gas and bacteria and stool dumping into my abdominal cavity. They figured that out, but they didn't know where or why. So they went in and did the exploratory surgery, and basically my intestines were like all just like wrapped around each other, and they had to spend all this time just unwrapping and cleaning out my whole abdomen, with saline solution. They just like used bags and bags of saline. And then finally they found 3 burns. So I'd been burned in 2 places in my colon, and then 1 place in my small intestine.
From the surgery?
And from the surgery. Yeah. And so this is something that, it's interesting because a lot of people haven't heard about this happening. But another great thing about having a podcast, right? I've had some amazing guests, and I had an OBGYN who is now a functional doctor. She explained to me exactly what happened. She said, because she did laparoscopic surgeries all the time. And with that fibroid surgery, they basically have a thermal tool. And she said, the thermal part at the end is really small, right? Because with laparoscopic, they're not cutting you open. They're just cutting little slits that they send a camera in one, and then they go in with the tools in the other one, And so the area that they can see is not as great, obviously, as if they cut you open. But also, she said it's so hard to cut out a fibroid without even just accidentally hitting a local organ or the uterus or anything like that, just because that it's such a small little tool in there. And so she said it happens a lot more than the literature is, not up to date on it. And so, yeah, essentially it hit 2 places in my colon and then part of my small intestine. And by the time they went in, they tried to save my colon, but my doctor, the surgeon, said it was like trying to sew together ground beef.
Wow.
It was just so, because you have to think 2 weeks, it just got worse and worse and worse. And so they ended up cutting out about half of my colon. And then I lost about 8 inches of small intestine, and I lost my appendix. And they basically, had to let me kind of rest for a day. So I was open, my body, my abdomen was still open in the ICU. And then on the next day, they formed an ostomy, which I'd never even really heard of an ostomy before, and for anybody that hasn't, it's like they take part of your intestine. And in my case, I had an ileostomy, and that's when they take part of your small intestine and pull it through your stomach, essentially, to outside of your body. And then you wear a bag on top of it. And that is where, your bowel movements come out of.
Yeah.
So they placed an ostomy for me. It was temporary, luckily. I had it for about 6.5 months. And then I also had a wound vac. They couldn't sew me back up because of the sepsis. So basically my whole, where they sliced me down the middle of my body, it had to stay open, and they put on what's called a wound vac. Yeah. Yeah. So it's really interesting, actually. And I think that I always like to tell this story because it kind of goes into the innate abilities of our body to heal. So, I don't know how many years ago, pre-wound vac, they would, basically, if they had to leave somebody open, like in my situation, they would clean out the wound multiple times a day, right? And just kind of keep it covered. But with the wound vac, it's this like black, almost like spongy material that they put in your wound and then attach a vacuum to it that like sucks out all the bad stuff. But that black material, spongy material, actually is irritating to the tissues, but that makes them heal faster. it's like triggering your immune system to
Yeah,
work more efficiently than
yeah,
just cleaning it out. And I think that's so
that,
cool, right?
that
Even though it's a
is.
pain in the butt
Yeah.
to have one, but it's still pretty amazing because I was supposed to have mine for about 2 months, I think, and I think I got mine off in 6 weeks. And so, yeah, it was crazy. I mean, the whole situation obviously was
Oh,
crazy, crazy, and
yeah.
life changing and career ending. You know, I had been a dancer for many years before that, and but I mean, not to take away because I've had to work certainly on all of the emotional PTSD aspects and continue to do that in therapy. But, it did also in some ways help refocus my work and
Yeah.
refocus my life, back to health when I'd kind of gotten away from doing that from a professional standpoint. So it brought me right back in. And that's really, why I do the work that I do now, because I want women to not have to have fibroids grow and get them into a surgical situation like me, and then B, like be able to empower themselves around digestive issues, around hormonal issues, all of that, so that they, yeah, basically just don't have to face these horrible things that can happen, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
certainly it doesn't happen to everybody, but it can happen.
And we do have, I have a lot of female listeners, like 4, like,
Oh, good.
so I just, and the podcasts I've done, Judy Jardine, I've had a lot of, because just in my career, one of the organizations I was in early in my career was Women in Logistics. And it was part of
Mm,
Warehousing Education and Research Council. But I've had Judy Jardine was on my podcast recently. She's a super good friend. My Nancy Fatine is another our engineer, CEO. She's super. She's
nice.
like when I had her on, she was talking about she does these like 75-day transformations once or twice a year.
Ooh,
So she's
cool.
super physically. So I'm definitely Nancy's gonna want to listen to this. Uh, my mom listens to it. So
Nice. I like it. Hi, mom.
yeah, and I have 3 sister-in-laws. They'll probably all I want them to listen to this one because I mean, definitely. So thank you for sharing. And then the
Yeah,
men, all the men,
absolutely.
we care about our testosterone. Dude,
There you go.
it
Exactly.
is
And
a
I will tell you, it's pretty amazing. I don't know because obviously I didn't do this work years ago, but I've worked with some men, in their 40s, even early mid 40s. And it's kind of surprising how early testosterone can start to drop, and
yeah,
and these men were in good shape and all those things. And we were kind of surprised. And I mean, I think that they maybe had some symptoms, so they weren't fully surprised, but I was surprised at how low. And I think just like women's hormones are being affected by so many things happening in our environment and our food and all that, I think it's also very much impacting men's hormones too.
yeah, it really is. The whatever's in the water,
Yep.
like it's
Yep. Yep.
endocrine disruptors
Well,
is what I call shampoo.
you got it.
Yeah,
Exactly. All of those products, 100%. And, both men and women are dealing with too high of estrogen because of those, what we call xenoestrogens that are in essentially all plastic things and and so many of our products that we use on our face and our hair and et cetera. So yeah, it's another, really important area for both men and women to really focus on. And I hate to use the word detox because I think that that has been lumped in with this thing of like, oh, you just do, a cleanse a year and it's fine. When really our liver has to detoxify or metabolize, like the more scientific way of saying it would be metabolize, but essentially it's detoxification too. Our liver has to do that for every single thing that comes in our body, right? And so when you include all these chemicals that are coming in our body too, our liver's working really hard. It works on 350 processes in our body, and so consistent liver support is one of the most important things in our toxic world that I think people can do.
and did you, we did a liver cleanse, one of my first classes at JFK. Have you is that part
Hmm.
of your
Mhm.
Do you remember? Were you in that class? That was like 2001. I don't know when we were talking
Yeah, I
earlier.
don't know. I wasn't there then. Yeah.
Yeah. You said you took the long track from JFK, and I've always joked because I started in '01 and I graduated in '07. So it was 6 years. But my thing was like
Oh, you were a lot longer
yeah,
track.
a 6-year master's degree is better than a 3-year master's degree because
100%,
yeah,
100%,
and
obviously.
it's kinda true because the time, I mean, there's more time for the tea to steep, is a good metaphor that I like.
Yep,
It's like it soaks in, and then you're surrounded by all these people for that period of time. I mean, we'll
yep,
always look back to it's nostalgic, and I love,
yeah,
uh, I was so looking forward to having you on because of that, and anytime I've been to lunch with a few people,
yeah,
but it's only a few people. Whenever we get together, it's like, wow, we're right back. That energy
right
from
back.
JFK is there
Mhm,
and supportive.
mhm.
The container, the,
Yep,
uh,
absolutely.
space that we created.
Yep,
So
yep, absolutely. I know.
we only have not that much longer, and
Mhm.
I want to keep going, but share. So who's we have show notes that I have somebody else do it. So anything we mentioned, so the OBGYN that talked about your surgery,
Mhm,
what was her name?
mhm.
We'll put a link to that
Um,
show in our show notes.
okay, Dr. Tabitha Barber, and will actually I think she broke that down when I was on her podcast.
Okay.
So I'll find that and I'll send that to you. I also have had her on my podcast, but I think she actually talked about, what went down on her podcast. So she's a great resource too. Great, another great podcast for people, and she
Yeah.
really focuses on gut health.
Well, yeah, and I think
Yeah.
if that, and the hormonal, I mean, there's just my wife's done a lot of research on it. It's just a really hard thing to learn about or find
Hmm.
somebody who does a holistic approach
Yeah.
because everyone thinks I call it capture the flag. Everyone thinks it's like they capture the flag. Oh, it's detox. Oh, it's
Right.
supplements. Oh,
Yeah.
it's this. And then whatever their this is, what's diet, then they're like, well, this is it. We found, the solution. It really
Yeah.
is. So what I loved about your stuff
Yeah.
is that
Yeah.
it's
It's so individual. I try and tell people that all of the time. And, the functional aspect of what I do is utilizing tests in order to see what's happening in the individual, right? So everything from stool testing, so we can actually see literally what's happening in your gut, to food sensitivities testing, to hormone testing, to even the serum labs or blood labs that we all get done. Hopefully, most of us get done yearly with our doctors. I can take those and use the functional nutrition lens to see deficiencies that people have in nutrients, right? So the doctor is looking for pathology, right? They're there to say, okay, you're out of range. And so I'm going to diagnose you with this thing. So obviously, I don't do that. I don't diagnose. I don't say you have this. There's none of that happening. I say, oh, very easy example is vitamin D. We can see from a simple blood test if you have low vitamin D levels, right? And functional levels have a much tighter range than the traditional reference range of your the lab companies. And this is what I always like to tell people, the lab companies will come up with a reference range, and that's 95% of people, right? So you only have 2.5% on that sort of pathology range on one end and 2.5% on that other end. So we have 95% of people in the normal range. But think about the health of this country. How many in that 95% are really healthy, right? I still don't want to be on the low end of the normal range or the high end of the normal range because that's not really probably that great either, right? So I look at a much tighter range and I say, okay, we know from research that, for example, your vitamin D levels are best in this range. And I can tell like how your B vitamins are doing based on some of these labs. Iron is also a huge thing for a lot of people. Zinc levels, all that kind of stuff. So that to me is what I love about this work is I can say, okay, let me see your labs and we can really get to that base and the root of your deficiencies and support those specifically rather than just be like, all right, take this supplement because it just came out and it's what everybody's using, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it drives me a little crazy, and I get it, whatever. They're just trying to sell stuff. But, people come to me and they'll have a bag full of supplements, and I'll ask them, why do you take this one? And they're like, I don't know. Or, oh, I heard it was good, and I'm like, it's not good for you if you don't eat it,
Yeah.
so it's really
Wow.
trying to hone in.
So you
Yeah.
are doing some awesome work. So what is the best way for people to connect with you? What's the best way?
So website is great, and that's just christinegarvin.com. And, I would say the big things that are coming up for any of the ladies that are listening, if you're interested in learning really how to understand your hormones and the foundations of taking care of your hormones, I'm doing my Hormone Breakthrough Blueprint program, which is my signature live group program that's happening starting in January 2023. And if I'm not sure when this is coming out, but people can get on the wait list for the when it launches. And then there's I have some self-guided courses. There's going to be a few opportunities. I'm going to have my one-on-ones are going to be very limited next year just because of all the things that are going on, but there's going to be some spots open for that too.
Yeah. And your self-guided classes, your website is awesome. I checked it out and I love it. I mean, it's a lot of work.
Thank you.
And, so
It's a lot. I mean, it's it's years worth of work really that has gone into it, and there will continue to be more. But my goal is to really get as much information about this stuff that people have never learned about all in one place so that you can really be able to look up and find, whatever you're looking for around any kind of health issue, but particularly hormones in your gut.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it's been such a pleasure to hang out with you. I'm so
It
lucky
has.
to the host of Hormonally Speaking Podcast. So people can check that out. We'll have it in the show notes. We'll
Yes.
have a link to
Yes.
christinegarvin.com, and people can check out the hormonal balance blueprint. That's what it's called. What's
Hormone Breakthrough Blueprint.
hormone
Yeah.
breakthrough?
I know. For a second, I was like, what is it called?
Yeah, that is so awesome. We
Hard to
created
remember.
an awesome container here, Christine. Thank you so much. This has been so awesome.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the Tao of Pizza podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.